It's
I mean, like,
Okay, if y'all don't mind taking a seat, we're going to get started here. First, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this bright and early Monday morning. I'd like to thank Chairman Tankersley and Chairman Fleming for driving their distances to come back to Atlanta to join us for this very important study committee. So why are we here? We're here because during the legislative session, governance issues, whether it be the state or cities or in particular counties, we get questions about these issues all the time, and we don't always have time to really delve into the intricate details of what would be the answers. So we're here for the answers. We have 159 counties in Georgia. A lot of them run differently, probably all of them run somewhat differently. And we're here to learn about who does what best, how, what, when, and where, and why. We have a wonderful list of speakers that we will hear from today, particularly Michelle Neesmith from ACCG, Jeff Turner from Clayton County, Teresa Tomlinson from Columbus-Muskogee County, Steve Taylor from Bartow County, and Kevin Little from Walton County. And you're going to hear a little bit about each of how their different governments run. We've asked them to discuss kind of the best practices and tell us about what they're doing right, and maybe tell us a little bit about what they think that they could improve. We would ask each speaker to keep their comments to about 10 minutes to hopefully give us some time for questions and maybe some comments. And with that, I think that we are ready to get started. Our first speaker is Michelle Neesmith with ACCG.
Good morning. Madam Chair, members of committee, thank you for the opportunity today to provide you with information on the various forms of government for our counties in Georgia. My name is Michelle Neesmith, and I'm the Policy and Research and Policy Advisor for ACCG. As you're aware, there are 159 counties in Georgia. We have more than any other state other than Texas. From Fulton County with a population of over 1 million people to Tolliver County with a population of less than 2,000. Counties are called upon to provide services to its citizens. In order to effectively and efficiently provide these services, counties need to have a form of government that works best for their community. There are 5 primary forms of government structures that counties in Georgia utilize, which are the sole commissioner, the traditional commission, county manager, county administrator, and the elected executive form. Each form has different policy-making and executive roles. For today's presentation, I'm going to provide an overview of each form of government. As part of your handout materials, there's a detailed model chart of how these forms operate. You can find them on page 12 of those materials. As a kind of a caveat, not all forms of government work like the models in these charts. Some counties have hybrid forms. The only way to know for certain the range of executive and policy-making powers that are provided to a board, a commissioner, or an administrator or a manager is to review the enabling legislation and see the powers that are put forth there. So first, I want to go over the traditional commission. The traditional commission format was a really popular form of government in the 20th century. Today, there are 26 counties that have the traditional commission form of government. The traditional commission format combines the primary policy-making and executive responsibilities and gives them to the Board of Commissioners. While the policy-making function is performed as the board collectively, the executive function can vary. For example, you can give functional assignments to, that could be a function, a department, or a set of departments to members of the board, including the hiring of department heads or of certain functions. You can supervise by committee, so sort of like a subcommittee of the board can supervise various functions, or you can have a supervision by the entire board, kind of like a committee on the whole. You can also have a chairperson to handle the day-to-day operations of the county. Boards that are operating under this format typically have 3 to 7 member boards, with 5 members being the most common. There are 19 that have a full-time chair. Counties that use this form of government range from, again, Tyler County with under 2,000 people, all the way up to Clayton County that has 285,000. So it's not dependent on size. It's, again, what that county feels does the best for their community. The next form of government I'd like to talk about is the sole commissioner. There are 8 counties that have the sole commissioner form of government. 6 of the 8 are located in North Georgia. This form of government is generally only found in Georgia, and in fact, in the 1990s, there was some controversy surrounding the sole commissioner form of government. Case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States that challenged the ability to have that. There was a legal precedent that they were trying to overturn. They said basically they thought it violated the Second Amendment, not the Second Amendment, the second part of the Voting Rights Act, but the Supreme Court of Georgia agreed with the state of Georgia that that wasn't the case, and so we can continue with the sole commissioner form today. But again, at this point, we only have 8 counties that have this form of government. This form is similar to the traditional commission, except that instead of having a board with these powers, it rests solely with one individual. Therefore, the sole commissioner has full policy-making and executive responsibilities. Of the 8 counties that utilize this form of government, 4 also employ county managers to help with the executive function. The next form of government I'd like to discuss is the elected executive. The elected executive form of government is rare in Georgia, but it's actually utilized in other states. To date, only DeKalb County has operated under this type of structure in Georgia. This form of government is similar to the separation of power structure of state government. Here, the Board of Commissioners performs the policy-making functions of government, while the county executive officer heads the executive branch. The CEO can be given limited or extensive powers. This is similar to the strong and weak mayoral form of government. Here, if the CEO is given extensive powers, he or she could have the power to appoint. I feel like my microphone's going in and out, is it? I'm sorry. Okay, do you want me just to?
No, I mean, we're good.
Okay, gotcha. All right, sorry about that. Again, the CEO can be given limited or extensive powers. This is similar to the strong and weak mayoral forms of government. If the CEO is given extensive powers, he or she could have the power to appoint and remove department heads and to develop the county budget, and may can veto acts of the Board of Commissioners. Under the limited or the weak form, the CEO is required to receive board approval to appoint or remove department heads and can only coordinate the budget process and may not have veto power. The next form of government is the administrator form of government. Under this form of government, the boards of commissioners ultimately have the responsibility for policymaking and executive functions of county government, but has advisory assistance through the policy role and substantial administrative assistance in the executive role through the appointment of a county administrator. The type of authority that's granted to the administrator varies by county, but it's generally more limited that that's provided to the county manager. Generally, the administrator's authority over department heads and budget preparation is limited, with a substantial role in these processes reserved for the commissioners. So the board has the power to appoint or remove the administrator, although in some cases the chair may have this authority. There are 62 counties in Georgia that have this form of government, and boards that operate under this form of government generally have 5 county commission members. This leads us to the final form of government, the county manager form of government. And in the manager form of government, the Board of Commissioners fills this primary policy-making role and oversees the executive functions of the county, but assigns day-to-day duties to the county manager. The county manager is selected by the board. The manager is granted substantial executive authority, such that he or she can be given the ability to hire and fire department heads and prepare the budget. The manager reports to the full board of managers rather than any single office holder. Just like the administrative form of government, the manager form of government, there's 62 counties that have this form. And again, it's about a 5-member board is the average that have this type. Sometimes you will hear the terms administrator and manager used interchangeably, even though they have different functions. And you may have a county that says they have a county manager, but the manager is actually utilized more like an administrator or vice versa. This is why it's really important to look at the actual enabling legislation to determine what the actual roles are for those particular people. Now, in terms of how you have a change to your form of government, you have to go before the General Assembly through a local act, and that would be the proper methodology. Now, the actual position of county manager is authorized through state law, and at the local level, through an ordinance, you can create the position of county manager. However, it's usually done through a local act because it seemed to be as a more stronger format to do it that way. And that's my general overview of the different forms of governments that we have. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Thank you. Representative Fleming?
Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that information. That was a good overview. The county manager and county administrative form of government, and I could have missed it. What's the distinction between those two, the county administrator, county manager?
Generally, the distinction is the manager is given more authority than the administrator does. So the board appoints the manager, and then the manager sees the day-to-day activities and is usually given authority to hire and fire those department head positions. The administrator, on the other hand, it just kind of depends on the enabling legislation, how far they go, but usually they don't have quite as much power as the manager. It may be that they assist the board with executive functions, but it may be that the board or even the chairman has the final say-so on hire and fires of the department heads. It just depends on how it's set up.
And then the last thing is, you said these form of governments are often set by local legislation. Is that what you said?
The form of governments go through a local act of the General Assembly, but if it's, for example, you just want to create the role of a county manager, there's a statute that authorizes that to be done at the local level.
Okay. And so the pay of the chairman and the, I was about to ask you the difference between a full-time chairman and a part-time chairman. I guess it's really the pay, isn't it?
I think it would be the pay, and also
or do those local acts distinguish usually full-time versus part-time?
I think it would need to be distinguished in the local act which one it would be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
It does not appear that anyone else on the that anyone else has any questions. So I wanted to thank you so much for your presentation, and I also wanted to recognize a couple of House members that came in, specifically Chairman Ed Reinders, thank you, and Representative Demetrius Douglas, thank you for being here. And then I think we have a couple in the audience, Representative Scott Holcomb, and then Representative Michelle Henson. Thank you all for joining us. All right, our next speaker is Mr. Jeff Turner, who is a multi-member commission chairman from Clayton County.
Madam Chair, board members, thank you for having me this morning. I am Jeff Turner. I am the chairman, full-time chairman of Clayton County. We are the third smallest county in the state, but the fifth or sixth most populated, and also the home of the world's busiest airport. So that in itself presents us with some challenges, but again, we are located south of the city of Atlanta. And to speak a little bit about the makeup of my board, again, we are a 5-member board. I am a full-time chairman elected by the whole of the county. I'm elected countywide. Other board members are part-time. I am, again, full-time, which means that there are some duties and responsibilities that should be relegated to a full-time chairman. Now, just by virtue of being elected countywide, people have a different expectation, whether you're a full-time or a part-time chairman or even a commissioner. So just to tell you a little bit about how we operate here in Clayton County is that we have I'm not going to say a weak form of chairman seat, but I am one vote of 5. There's no distinction between my vote or anybody else's. I run the board meetings. I am a policymaker. I have to sign all the documents. I have administrative and legislative duties. Now, when it comes to the hiring and firing of employees or directors, my board a couple of years back, I'll say about 10 years ago, made themselves the head of department heads. So what we see is that no department head can be fired without first coming before the full board. And we have to do that in public. Because for the full board to meet, we got to have a quorum. And we have to have a public meeting. So that's problematic number 1 to me, that we have to put a department head before us in a public meeting and talk about what issue they had or what incident occurred. And example 2 is being a full-time chairman. A department head can come to my office. I might have an issue with them, speak to him or her about that issue, and they can be totally belligerent towards me, cuss me out or do whatever else. The only authority that I have, being a full-time chair, is to send them home with pay until the full board meets to take up that issue. And on occasion, it hasn't happened, thank God. Let me go ahead and clarify that. But when the full board meets, if the majority of the board says that he or she did not mean it, put them back to work, then there is no repercussions to their actions. I'm a law enforcement officer, 23 years, chief of police at one point. I believe in a clear chain of command. There needs to be no ambiguity, in terms of what directors need to do and who they need to report to. As such, what, in my opinion, full-time chairmen need to have certain statutory rights given to him or her. The rights of, I'm gonna speak for myself, of this chairman have been, well, the chairman in the last 10 years, I've been the chairman for 5 years now, has been systematically usurped over the years, where the chairman used to set the agenda, the chairman used to set the budget. None of that's happening now. Those duties and responsibilities fall on the chief operating officer. So we don't have a county manager, we don't have a county administrator, we have a chief operating officer. So with the director still reporting to the full board, what you'll see is that some directors will commission shop. As long as they keep 3 commissioners on their side, they're in good standing. So what you see is sometimes some of those directors will favor projects of the 3 commissioners that favor them over the other 2. And in my opinion, that's wrong. Again, going back to the statutory rights of a full-time commissioner, again, the department heads report directly to a commissioner, the chairman rather, at which time they can get clear direction. We have a chief operating officer. He or she should be responsible, again, for the operations of the day-to-day activities, but he or she, being chief operating officer, county manager, or whoever it may be, should directly report solely to the chairman. Now, that is a system that is a failed system, the way we are operating in Clayton County. There needs to be some change there. It's not to take anything away from part-time commissioners, but when you have a full-time chairman elected by the entirety of the county, there's a certain level of expectation that the citizens expect. They come to you being the chairman, and they want answers. They want people to be held accountable. But when 3 commissioners does something different or contrary to what should be done, then they look, of course, at the chairman, because the chairman is the face of the county and the person who is full-time and more accessible. So that definitely needs to be looked at in terms of that type of structure when it comes to serving a county. Another example of the failed system that we are under, although we are a county board of 5 ahead of the department heads, for performance evaluation purposes, the command staff are evaluated by, or should be evaluated by, 5 commissioners, since we are the head of the department heads. I'm the only one who submits performance evaluations. Now, you can't have it both ways. You can't want to be part of something and not have the full duties and responsibilities and shove that off on a chairman and then expect to still be in that role. So, lastly, the only thing I'm going to say is that when you're looking at form of governments, if you're going to have a full-time chairman, that chairman needs to have rights, statutory rights, because therefore it can't be changed at the local level, which in my case have been changed from the previous chairman even to me, that they will be responsible for because they are elected by the entirety of the county. And again, it's not about taking out the part-time commissioners because they play a vital role because they represent their districts and at the end of the day, the county as a whole. But for the sake of the employees, they need to know and understand who they are reporting to and what the expectation is. When you have 5 commissioners, you have 5 different, on occasion, 5 different visions, 5 different directions. If I give them a direction and one of the 3 that's in charge give them a direction, then they have to pick and choose. That puts them in a bad position. Knowing the direction you need to go in and follow makes it easier and better for the employees as a whole. And that's all I got to say, so I entertain any questions.
I have one quick question. So your position is a full-time position, but the other commissioners are part-time? Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, ma'am, that is correct.
Okay. Who does the budgetary process? Who puts the budget together?
The COO, and he gets input from the other 5 commissioners, and then, of course, we go through the CFO puts the budget together with the COO. Mm-hmm. They get 5 commissioners' input, and then we vote on it.
Okay, so it's not presented like through you as the full-time?
No.
Okay.
And let me say this. When I used to set the budget, and the chairman used to set the budget, we set the budget for elected officials as well. So what we see is, if the elected official has an issue with that budget, they're taking it up with a COO or a county manager, as opposed to another elected official who could provide some more insight, or politically it could harm that county manager or COO, because he's not an elected official, he's not a political figure. Mm-hmm. So by putting it back in the hands of a chairman or elected official, I think it would be more efficient, especially dealing with other elected officials.
Okay, thank you. Chairman Fleming has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you being here today and chatting with us about your role. And you were talking about the issue of discipline, and I was wondering, does the COO or any of the department heads have the ability to discipline employees, such as reprimands and suspension with pay and whatnot?
Yeah, so department heads discipline and fire their employees.
Okay.
The COO can only recommend that a department head be fired or disciplined.
To the full board?
To the full board. And if recommendation to do either, to fire the person comes before us, we have to do it in a public meeting. And again, I have a problem with that. I think that the process should be that the COO makes the determination, as spoken earlier, to fire a department head, of course, with sufficient cause. And then the chairman should make the ultimate decision.
Do y'all have an appeals process if an employee is laid off?
Yes, we do.
How does that work?
We have a civil service merit process where the employee, after being terminated, has 10 days in which to file a grievance. And then they are heard by a separate board whether or not there was probable cause or not to fire that individual.
Does that board have the authority to reinstate the employee
To recommend, then it comes back before us.
for final decision?
Yes,
for
sir.
Full commission?
Rather not put that person back to work or
Now,
do something other.
so the finance director fires one of her underlings, and that employee is upset. They appeal to the civil service board, I think you described it, and then the decision comes back, well, a recommendation comes back to them, but it doesn't go back to the finance director, it comes back to the full board.
That is correct. She'll get a copy. She'll be placed on notice that this person, that the board is recommending that they be reinstated, and it comes back to us, because the other option is to, let's say that person's been out for a year,
Mm-hmm.
and that has happened because there has been a backlog.
Mm-hmm.
Then if we decide to, well, we'll give them back pay,
Mm-hmm.
but we also have an option of asking them not to come back, sign a waiver,
Mm-hmm.
and go about your business, basically.
Thank you.
Chairman Reinders?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And this may go to whoever can answer it. I was under the impression that one of the reasons that you can go into executive session was for the purposes of personnel. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, sir, that is correct. You go and discuss only in executive session. Anytime you're gonna take a vote, it has to be in a public meeting. So we go in, we can discuss about the case, and then we can come back out to take a vote on it. But for whatever reason, my board holds a public hearing on the department head to talk about, I guess, when
So it's
trying
not
to be transparent.
It's not a matter that you don't go into executive session always to do that.
Say again.
Do you ever go into executive session to discuss personnel?
Yes. But when it comes to firing,
Right?
we do it in a public meeting.
I think the way I've always heard it described is that it's a little bit like a jury. You accept the evidence in public,
That's
you
it,
deliberate
absolutely.
in private, and then you give the sentence in public again. So public, private, public. Yeah.
Differently than I'd ever been familiar with. You never mentioned the executive session part. I mean,
Yes.
you've got to find the balance between being able to discuss and keeping the public informed.
Absolutely, and he hit it dead on about the evidence. To accept and receive evidence, it has to be done in a public hearing.
And Madam, if I may follow up with someone from ACCG, and I get the point on the commissioner shopping. It does, I see where that can potentially undermine. Is that a common, or is that unusual to have that form to say if you want to be able to, as he described it, go and commission shop? Is that the standard? Do you see that a lot? What percentage of counties you think have that kind of authority to be able to do that now, to commission shop to save someone's job?
Well, they first would have to have the title of being the head of department head as a board, as a full board. Did you make comment as to how many governments actually are head of department heads?
We have 29 counties that have the traditional commission format, but in terms of how many have this similar problem, I can't speak to that.
How often does it show up on your radar screen?
That's not something I have knowledge of. I'm sorry, Mr.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair?
Ooh, I wonder where we're getting feet. There we go. Chairman Turner, you mentioned that you are allowed to vote. Is that on every issue, or are you just a tiebreaker, or how are your powers defined about voting?
I vote on every issue. There's 5 board members. I have 1 vote. I'm 1 vote of 5, and that's just the way our system has been.
Okay, and so you indicated that over the years, your powers have been somewhat diminished by by your board voting to change your authority level on different aspects of Clayton County government?
Yes, ma'am. And basically what I meant about that, and it started with the previous chairman, who some of the board members thought that he wasn't doing an ample job, so they started taking away his authority for oversight authority over certain issues, how he ran his day-to-day operations. When they came The two that came that were stripped from my office was the budget and the setting of the agenda. So now, going back to the majority of the board, through the COO, can direct what is on that agenda. Because we all know that it takes 3 people to fire you.
Right.
So when you have people who have families, you really can't blame them for always trying to do right by their family. And sometimes it just gets mixed up in the fray. So,
Having been a county commissioner for 10 years, I do know that happens. I mean,
Yes.
people are going to advocate for certain issues, and in your case, it would be 3.
absolutely, it's the majority. And, I respect our democracy, and I respect the form of government that we have. But going back to Madam Chair's earlier comments, what is efficient? What can we do better? And I think by giving the chairperson statutory rights would make our system in Clayton County a whole lot better.
Thank you.
Thank you for your candid commentary. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you.
Next, we have Teresa Tomlinson from Columbus, Muskogee. I'm very excited about Mayor Tomlinson, as she is a Chamblee High grad straight out of HD 80.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, Madam Chair and committee members, thank you so much for having us here today to talk about Columbus, Georgia. What I did was prepare a little PowerPoint, but I'm not going to speak to all of those issues. I'm just going to hit the first couple. And Blake, can you put that up? And I presume we'll try to... I'm just going to hit on the first couple of slides and then leave the rest with you all so you can have it in your files and information should you wish to see further detail about various things. Yeah, that's all right. No problem.
No, it doesn't want to come
Great. Oh. Well, I can certainly go ahead and talk and then you will have this for your records. And let's see, Blake. All right. So, of course, we're 90 miles southwest of you all here. We have 200,000 citizens. We're the second largest city in the state of Georgia. Of course, if there's any of our friends from Augusta in the room, we'll just have to arm wrestle about that outside. As we have a healthy competition. We're also home, of course, to the great Calvin Smyre and what we think is the best legislative delegation in the state of Georgia. But we were the state's first approved consolidated government in 1970. It was implemented in 1971. We're actually the 16th largest consolidated government in the United States. So there's not that many, but you'd be surprised some of the large communities in the country that are consolidated reaping those efficiencies. It's a full-time mayor, CEO, chief elected officer is what it's called in our charter. It's a full-time city manager, chief operating officer, COO, and 10 part-time counselors, 8 of whom are district counselors and 2 at large. The mayor is a nonpartisan position. It's 4-year terms, 2-term limits. It's a base salary of just under $80,000, but of course car allowance, and then you can get the seniority bump too should you be reelected. The powers are that you're the official head of the consolidated government, that you're the official spokesperson, also the public safety director. You preside at all meetings of the council and, quote, have a voice in the proceedings. And you vote in case of tie, and you have a qualified veto, which basically just means I have the ability to force a reconsideration should there be an issue that I feel that maybe things have changed, or I have the opportunity to convince some counselors to switch their votes. The mayor nominates all city officers, which would be the city manager, the city attorney, the chief of police, the chief of fire EMS, the warden of Muskogee County Prison, which in our case is the largest work camp in the state of Georgia with some 600 prisoners that we do field every day for work within our county, and also Homeland Security Director, which the mayor oversees. One thing in our charter that of course a mayor would love to see is that all of whom are responsible to and accountable to the mayor. So that provides some great continuity and stability in that regard. The mayor submits the recommended annual budget, and if anybody's interested in that, we did recently have some litigation to touch on a point made by Chairman Turner, where the city was actually affirmed and upheld a Georgia Supreme Court precedent that the mayor makes those recommendations as it relates to elected officials, even constitutional officers. And then, of course, the legislature would rule in the final budget. And the mayor also has the ability to conduct studies, to appoint commissions, and to make formal recommendations to the council. The city manager appoints and removes all department heads with consent of council, and also directs and supervises the departments, the offices, and agencies of the city, oversees the daily operations and responsibilities of each department, submits to the mayor a complete report of finances and activities, keeps the mayor and council fully advised, undertakes the care and custody of all buildings and real property, directs, supervises the administration of all streets, bridges, drains, and other public works, and of course is the liaison between the mayor, council, boards, commissions, and employees. The city council, of course, has the traditional legislative duties. They have the maximum power allowed by the Georgia Constitution, Georgia law, and of course our charter. They have that's incorrect. I'm sorry. They have four-year terms and no term limits. So please excuse that typo, and I'll correct that and Blake get you a revised copy. Their salary is approximately $17,000 on average for this part-time position, and they adopt all ordinances, rules, and act the budget, expend funds. But here's an interesting thing that comes in handy, and has actually been adopted as part of the ethos of our government. I've only had to remind someone of it once, and that is that all contact with all appointed officers, department heads, and employees must occur through the mayor. Now, of course, if there's a huge tree down in the middle of your street following the storm and you want to call the public works director, nobody's going to care about that. We've just, over the years, these past decades, have reached that sort of equilibrium. But again, to talk about some of Chairman Turner's comments, that would be extraordinary if a legislator did contact an employee or a department head, particularly about something that would be political in nature. Raising the garbage collection fee, for instance, and what their position was on that. We have the most efficient expenditure per capita of any city of like size, and we believe that is due to our consolidation at just over $1,300 per person. And at the same time, we expend more per capita on public safety, which is just about 40% of our budget. Our tax digest has been fairly stable because we have the property tax freeze. We did not fall as far as Atlanta and some of those during the recession, but it has had decades-long stagnation. So if you ever want to bring me back on another hearing, I'd be welcome. Excited to talk to you about that. I've given you some information about our budget and how it's distributed. We do have 8-cent sales tax, and you can see there them listed out to speak about some of the non-consolidated governments where a lot of times the division of those sales taxes become quite a debate. We go to conferences and they ask us how we handle the debate. Well, the city manager and I say we sit on one side of the table and make a demand, and then we sit on the other side of the table and we grant our demand because we just get it. We get it all. So that saves us some consternation. And again, just some breakdown of our financial materials, our expenditures. We have a AA+ bond rating and an A2 bond rating. And then, of course, I had to throw in some bragging stuff, so you can read that in your spare time. Any questions?
Chairman Fleming?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just out of curiosity, how long have you been mayor?
7.5 years.
Are you term limited?
Yes, I'm officially a lame duck.
Two.
2 4-year terms.
And so there's already been a new mayor elected?
Yes, our 20-year veteran of our council and former budget chair, so we're in good hands.
And is the mayor considered full-time in Columbus?
Yes, sir, full-time.
What did you do before you became mayor?
I practiced law.
Yeah, okay. The You mentioned that I think you said about you appoint all you nominate all department heads.
Yes.
And they have to be approved by the
Not
council.
departments, just those appointed officers that are set out in our charter.
Okay.
So the city manager, city attorney, all of the public safety, because as public safety director, I would appoint those, and they do report direct to me. One interesting thing is you debate these various forms of government. One thing that is, I think, may be unique, but certainly is unusual, is that the city manager reports direct to the mayor.
Do you have to nominate the city manager?
Yes.
And that manager has to be approved by the council?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes,
Appointment and confirmation, basically.
exactly.
And the hiring and firing.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work? Do you have any hiring and firing authority?
Now, if it's those appointed officers, yes, obviously,
Okay.
it would, the same way in, the same way out, right?
Okay.
So I would recommend that someone be relieved from their duties and have to garner 6 votes to have that happen.
Okay.
If it's a department head or certainly a division head, something of that nature, it would be the city manager that would do the termination. And also, it's the city manager that makes that recommendation for hire and then advice and consent of council.
Without a recommendation from the city manager, does the council and mayor have the authority to fire a department head?
No, and we have had, just before I came in, quite a controversial situation where the elected officials were ready to pounce much more quickly than the city manager, and he took some time to fully investigate and then made a recommendation of termination, and it was approved.
And the last question, Madam Chair, that I wanted to ask the mayor was, tell me about the OLOST, and I know
Yes.
it's 1 cent.
Yes, yes,
But,
sir.
but how is it spent, and what restrictions are?
Yes,
from the
and
state?
that's in there, and so when you read it, you'll need this caveat, or you won't be able to follow some of those numbers in the PowerPoint, is that OLOST is general operating funds. It is no different than anything else. We could spend it on anything the Georgia Constitution allows you to spend general operating funds on, okay? But we, for purposes of transparency, we made a pledge to our citizens that if they would approve the OLOST, we would segregate it 30% for infrastructure, 70% for public safety. That is not enforceable. Should there be, God forbid, a disaster, and we needed funds, we could spend that OLOST on anything we needed for the city, but we would rue the day at the ballot box. So we segregate that out voluntarily on an accounting basis so that our citizens know that we are making good on our promise. So
So-
70% public
So
safety.
you have 8 cent sales tax?
Yes, sir.
And 4 of them are state?
Yes.
And then I see you have an ELOS for the school system.
Yes.
You have a
T-SPLOST.
SPLOST and a T-SPLOST, and then an OLOST. So your OLOST is just a lost. It's not a
We
different
have a
creature.
lost. We have the
Oh.
permanent penny lost. and
So
we
you have
a
9
permanent-
cents
No. Let's see. We have 4 cents.
for the state?
You're right, and then we have permanent lost, permanent O-lost, T-SPLOST, and E-lost, E-SPLOST.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, yeah, 2 of those we actually approved during the recession. So our folks will approve taxes, but they demand transparency.
So you have an OLOST and a lost.
Yes.
Okay. And the OLOST, once again, has to be spent how? I'm sorry, you mentioned it. not-
70% public safety and 30% infrastructure.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And how often does it have to be renewed? Is
Those
it-
are permanent,
It's permanent?
permanent.
It's
yes.
permanent, okay.
Mhm.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mayor, for presenting. And I love the nonpartisan. I think I've heard your name bannered about a couple times on potential statewide offices, though.
Yes.
correct?
Yes, I think that comes with just holding office, period, but yes, sir. Yeah.
Long pause. I want to ask you about the lawsuit with the
Yeah.
constitutional officer. What was the argument that you won on, and what constitutional officers?
Well, it was the sheriff, it was the clerk of Superior Court, the municipal marshal, and the municipal clerk that sued. It was during recessionary times, so nobody was happy, obviously. And the argument of the plaintiffs was that they, as particularly constitutional officers, that they set their budget and we had to meet it, right? And there's actually Georgia Supreme Court precedent. It's pretty clear that's not the case, but the way it was being argued was sort of nuanced. And so at the Superior Court level, it was held reaffirming that indeed The mayor proposes the budget. There's actually a Georgia statute that provides for that in this type of government. And then, of course, it's council that actually declares what the budget will be. And so we won the litigation on the grounds that we asserted, and both the clerk and the sheriff were not reelected.
If I may continue down that train of thought, do you believe that your situation of being a consolidated government played into the decision-making of the Supreme Court in Georgia? So if you didn't have that and you were just a regular county in one of the normal governing counties, do you recall if that issue came up at all?
I will tell you this, I'll just be honest. I think that there is a lot of credibility and weight that comes with being a consolidated government. I know I have a natural bias, obviously.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of credibility because there's such checks and balances that, in my experience, the court takes what the city's position is very, very seriously. But I
Do you
really
recall
think
if the question was specifically, if the argument was specifically made where consolidated government was used as a talking point?
Oh, it was by us, yes, sir, absolutely.
And do you recall if the ruling by the Supreme Court mentioned because you're a consolidated government why it may be viewed differently?
It may well have, yes, sir. And it was a Superior Court decision that concluded our litigation. So the Supreme Court authority, it was not in our case. The Supreme Court just interpreted, the Superior Court just interpreted the Supreme Court authority.
And,
so I don't know if that
finally,
was
when was that ruling?
Let me see here. It would have been, it was election year, so it would have been 2016.
And one more follow-up, Madam Chair, only because I've been down this road so many different times. Does ACCG have a thought on whether consolidated, at the appropriate time, you can get it with me offline, whether the ACCG has a thought on whether the consolidated weighed into that decision-making, or do you think it would apply to all county governments? At the appropriate time, doesn't have to be now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much for your presentation,
Thank you.
Madam Mayor. Next, we have Steve Taylor, the sole commissioner from Bartow County.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for having me today. And you know, the sole commissioner form of government is unique. It's especially in Georgia. We're the only state that, as far as I know, that still allows sole commissioner forms of government. There's 8 counties in Georgia presently that has a sole commissioner form of government. And you might think it's way, way different from a full-time chairman, but it's really not. It's basically the same form of government as full-time chairman, only there's only 1 vote instead of 5. So I think it is honestly the most efficient form of government that you could have. There is, of course, the downside would be there could be too much power in one hands if you had somebody corrupt. I take privilege to say that in Bartow County, where I'm from, we've had 4 commissioners in the last 60 years. I'm one of those. I'm in my 6th year as a commissioner. I ran a business in Bartow County for 35 years. It was a family business. I graduated from Reinhardt College and went right into working for my grandfather in our business. So I was chairman of our local development authority for 20 years. And just to give you some background, and I got very interested in economic development. And if there's an advantage to the sole commissioner form of government, it's in economic development and negotiating with companies that come in. We compete with other counties in Georgia. Kevin Little's here. Walton County is one of our big competitors. We love each other, but we're friendly competitors. When businesses look at Georgia, they're looking for the best deal they can get, of course. And as a sole commissioner, I don't have a board or anybody else that I have to deal with. I think I do what's right by my community. We get a few. I'm not saying we get more than our share, but we do pretty good with economic development, and that's one of the key advantages for a sole commissioner. We have efficiencies in government. I think that I've got a county administrator, and he works really hard, just like me. He came from private law practice, and he works really hard in looking for efficiencies for the taxpayers. Surrounding Bartow County, we're the lowest millaged millage rate of any county around us, and I think that's due to having a history of sole commissioners in our county. As far as hiring and firing, I don't get involved with hiring unless it's at the department head level. And of course, I hired the county administrator and the county CFO. Most of the department heads were there when I got there. Some have retired. We did terminate a couple of department heads in my 6 years, and that's my involvement in the firing process. Now, department heads have the right to terminate someone. They along with our HR director, that person has an appeals right that goes through the county administrator. If that person's still not satisfied, we have a 5-member appeals board that's made up of county department heads. And then the department heads would bring that recommendation to me, whether to keep that person or to terminate that person. In my 6 years, that's happened 3 times. And once, actually, we actually overruled the department head and kept that person. But it was really, we do this in private. We don't make it as Chairman Turner said, we don't do this in public. We don't want the embarrassment to that person if he's terminated, he or she is terminated, to come in front of a big committee. Of course, they have the right to appeals, and then it does become a public meeting when that happens. But the process works really good for Bartow County. In 2008, we had we put it before the voters again, a referendum whether to have a 5-person board with a full-time chairman or keep the sole commissioner. We decided to keep the sole commissioner, and that vote was about 70% in favor of the sole commissioner. It's always worked in our county. I know it's probably not a good fit in these counties that have 500,000 to 1 million people, but our county, we're the largest county with a sole commissioner, and we've got about 110,000 people. The smallest counties are around 25,000. So it's a really good, efficient form of government for the smaller counties, and I can see how these very huge, big counties, say 500,000 and up, I can see how it probably wouldn't be good. But for rural Georgia, I think it would be a great form of government, even for more counties to adopt it. But that's basically, I can go over some of the same things that Chairman Turner told you about our hiring and firing. Out, listen to him, and a lot of our processes are the same, but we just have little niches of, and I'm sure every county has things that they do different, and we just look for efficiencies in government. And I go in every day just like my county administrator. I'm in charge of policy. Department heads are usually in my office every morning before lunch. Everybody's got a right to come and talk to me directly, and also the administrator. So I deal with the larger departments like the fire department. I deal with the elected officials. The administrator deals with most department heads other than the fire and rec department. Those fall under my responsibility. So elected officials deal directly with me. Starting around the 1st of October, we'll start our budget process, and we deal with we meet with the elected officials first, and by the 1st of November, we start bring our department heads in, and by December 1st, we have our budget ready for the new year. We're on a calendar year, so our new budget starts the January 1. So not really unlike the full-time chairman, but there is some differences, and I think there are advantages. I hope our community decides to stay with a sole commissioner form of government. I think we're going to, talking to our legislatures, we're going to probably bring it up again in 2022, another referendum, whether we keep our sole commissioner form of government or a 5-person board. I do think it should be up to the citizens to decide what the board structure looks like, whether it's a sole commissioner or a 5-member board or a 3-member board. So I can't add much to what my colleagues have already said, but any questions you may have, I'd welcome.
Yes, sir. I have a couple actually. How long are your terms?
My term's 4 years.
4 years. Okay. And so you have a CFO, so I assume she prepares the budget and then provides it to you?
She does.
And then
Her and the administrator works on the budget. And I have some, I sit through some of those meetings. I don't get it down into the weeds, but the general overall budget, we know what that number needs to be based on our tax digest. So, yes, she does most all of that.
do y'all have public meetings concerning the budget?
We have a
or
public
town hall?
meeting every month.
Mhm.
And of course, just like everyone else, when I adopt the millage, we have some citizens there that voice their concerns, especially if you don't do the rollback. You have a lot of citizens in there. So just like 3 and 5 person board, the citizens come out and nobody likes a tax increase. So same process as everyone else. I have a public meeting the second Wednesday at 10 o'clock every month.
Okay. And then so you were talking about possibly having another vote in 2022. Do y'all have like a charter review commission, or how does that work? Is it a referendum that just goes on the ballot?
I've never been through one, but from what I understand, we have a citizens advisory board that would be appointed by each legislature. We have 3 representatives and 2 state senators in our county. So they would appoint an advisory committee, and they would come up with a structure about what to put on the ballot. So, excuse me. But that's the way it worked last time, and I assume that's the way it would come up in 2022.
Okay. Chairman Reinders?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And I love the thought process, too many cooks spoil the broth kind of thing. But the elephant in the room to me on a situation like this would be, what happens if sometimes during that 60 years someone accused the sole commissioner of a conflict of interest?
Well, you know, I guess always there's that possibility out there, just like somebody that would accuse a board chairman of a conflict of interest. We would handle it the same way.
Would you recuse yourself?
I couldn't recuse myself.
Right.
I'm the only elected board member, so that's never come up. But that's a good question. I guess, you know, in certain cases, the governor could remove me just like he has other elected officials throughout the state if there was some malfeasance or what have you. Thank God that hasn't happened in our community. The citizens would take care of that on election day. But if I understand that the downside would be, say, year 1 or 2, something happened, you would have to live with that person for the next 2 years. That's the only downside in the sole commissioner form of government that I could see.
And again, I like the concept, I really do. I'm just trying to wonder, especially as it relates to economic development, because we get questions all the time, especially when it comes to things like abatements.
Tax abatements?
Yeah, and all kinds of fun stuff like that. And if it was going through someone's property, I'm just wondering, is there a process in place?
Well, as far as tax abatements, that would be on myself and the local school board. Even though I can abate school board taxes, in our case, in Bartow County, we've never done that without including the school board in those tax abatements. So I think they should have a seat at the table when we're talking to companies to come in. So,
and I shouldn't have gotten the weeds on the abatement. Let me ask ACCG the question. Do you know in those kind of governments where there's a sole, if there's a question, where there's a sole commissioner, if there's a question of a conflict of interest, is there a way to potentially resolve that to the satisfaction of both?
I'm sure there is a process, but I may.
All right. Barry? I'm sorry, Representative Flynn.
I was just sitting there thinking, if you have a county administrator, correct?
I do have a county
What you
administrator.
could do is publicly declare that you're going to remove yourself from decision-making process, turn it over to the county administrator, let the county administrator decide, and whatever he decides, you enact it formally without any input.
I could do that. I've never been in a conflict of interest. Like I say, I ran a business for 35 years. I also developed real estate, and that could be big conflicts of interest. I deliberately, publicly quit. I got out of the real estate business when I was elected. I do still have some rental properties, but other than building, so, yeah, I understand that, but just to, just to let you know, I can see where there could be some conflicts. There hasn't been one that I know of since I've been commissioner. And yes, I would remove myself and would be happy to let the county administrator take over in that instance.
If I may, Madam Chair, so if someone addresses you by your title, do they call you chairman or commissioner?
They call me commissioner in
Commissioner.
my community.
Commissioner,
Yes.
okay. And so, as I understand the open meetings laws, if 3 out of 5 members of a commission meet to discuss something, they have violated the open meetings law if they don't call a meeting. Now, have you talked to yourself? Have you
Yeah.
violated the open meetings law?
Well, I tell people when I go to the bathroom, I leave the door open. So yeah, that's another advantage of being sole commissioner. You don't have to worry about the open meetings laws. So,
Interesting.
thank you.
Mr. Commissioner, I actually have a question from Chairman Buddy Harden. I believe he has a county that is a sole commissioner structure. And I think they may have had a situation where the sole commissioner either died in office or resigned. And his question, or in this situation, the chief probate judge became the sole commissioner as well as maintaining his job as the probate judge.
That's correct.
Is-
Happened in our county also.
Okay, so, and that was my question is, is this something that y'all think is beneficial or?
I think that process is really kind of antiquated. It's been on the books in the legislature for years and years. If a sole commissioner dies in office, which happened to us in 1980, the probate judge became commissioner. He can either become commissioner himself or appoint someone to be commissioner until there's an election. So our probate judge was actually commissioner for about 6 months, and so he just took over, and fortunately he did a good job. He appointed one of the county administrators, actually the county administrator, to run the county. He just signed contracts and documents, but that probably should be either the legislature should appoint that person or the governor, somebody that's qualified to run the county.
So when the chief probate judge appoints the sole commissioner, do they stay for the entire length of the person's term beforehand, or do they have a special election and
They have a special election in the next cycle. It would either be more than likely in the spring or in the November elections.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much for your time. Does anybody
Thank you.
else? Oh, I'm sorry. Chairman Fleming had one
Just
more.
real briefly, a thought, and you can comment on it, correct me if I got my history wrong, but I was thinking about this concept of sole commissioner. It seems kind of strange to those of us not familiar with it. But then as I recall Georgia history, and this goes back to 18-something, we used to have, the person that ran the county was called the ordinary. And I think they called him the ordinary because he was a judge as well as served the administrative functions of the county, and he was the ordinary judge, not the Superior Court judge, so he dealt with the ordinary.
That's correct.
Now, then probably, I don't know exactly when, right around the turn of the last century, they began to create something called road commissioners, commissioner of roads, because the issue of roads and getting your crops to market was so important. And they began to take over responsibilities from the ordinary, and that's how your board of commissioners developed. But
Yes,
this-
it was
this
Commissioner
idea
of Roads and Revenues, correct.
But this idea of a sole commissioner really is absolutely what we started with. We just called it an ordinary, and they were also the judge too, I think.
Yeah, I think
If
around
I understand the
19
history,
Yeah, around 1980, there was about 40, 50 sole commissioners, and they have dwindled down in the 90s. We got under 10, and now it's down to 8, so
Thank you.
thank you. Is that it? Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Kevin Little, the full-time commissioner from Walton County.
Madam Chair and Committee, thank y'all for having me today. I'm Kevin Little, Chairman of Walton County Board of Commissioners. I'm in my 5th term, 18th year. I would say that we in Walton County is kind of a hybrid, traditional form of government. My commission and chairman back in the 90s, they sued and fought each other. And at the time, the commission tried to carry to the legislature, they wanted a county manager form of government. And the House side did carry it and get it successfully passed, but it was never introduced in the Senate. So basically, what happened was is they put their set. This thing is awful when when it quits talking. But the Board of Commissioners in Walton County is fully in charge, fully vested with delegation powers. Chairman Turner spoke earlier. There's a lot of problems that he has that I have also. I am elected countywide, but fortunately, since 2001, when I was first elected, I have been delegated full day-to-day powers and full department. I can talk louder than this thing, I'm trusting you, unless it's taping, but because that is kind of bothersome. But what we do in Walton County is the insight of the Board of Commissioners, and I do have the lucky one. I know the mayor here said she had 10, but I have 6 commissioners and myself who is elected countywide. So that's quite a lot to deal with. I always said if Gwinnett County could be run by 4 and a chair, then Walton County could. Our population's around 90,000. We grew from 30,000 in 1980 to 90,000 and around now. We probably won't go over 100 at this next census. But what the board's insight was that if they ever had another chairman similar to what they had in the late 90s that was they disagreed with and it was kind of a problem, then they could just say, yeah, you elected countywide, but we're going to put this administrator in to run day-to-day operations, and we will answer to them, and they'll do all the leadership, all the powers and such as that. And so, someone that's probably not as easygoing and calm-minded as I am may have a little bit of a problem with that. We've had really good commissioners down through the years that have respected the leadership of the chair, and every once in a while you'll have one that wants to step out and try to run. It takes 4 of them. I set the agenda, and so it takes 4 of them to add something to the agenda or take something off the agenda. And so, but we have had one every once in a while to step out. And as Chairman Turner said, it's very, very hard for department heads and county employees to work for 7 bosses when they don't know really and truly. These people, I can't hire or fire, although I sign off on all department heads' hires, and I am the appealing authority if they fire. So it's kind of a weird. That's the reason I said it's a hybrid situation. I have people that are terminated by a department head, and I am the appealing authority, and they appeal to me, and if I uphold or overturn the decision, we do have a appeals committee also that they can go to if they're not happy with the decision. But the problem that Commissioner Turner spoke on is all the department heads. We went into executive session to terminate a financial officer before, and I presented all the evidence, and we presented everything to them in executive session. Well, they didn't want to come out in public and fire them, but the way it's written, they could not give me the authority in executive session to terminate the person because I don't have the firing authority. They have the full vested authority to hire and fire department heads. So basically they had to do what Chairman Turner said. They had to come out and make a motion in public meeting with that person standing there and say, you make a motion to be terminated. So that makes it very, very hard in that situation. And I do agree with him on something needs to be cleared up in that direction. But the budget each year is the chairman and the CFO, we do our budget. As I've grown over these 18 years, in 2001, the whole board sat down and listened to all the constitutional officers, all department heads. Took about 4 or 5 nights, them presenting the board, presenting their budgets. And so every year after that, and even as we've changed commissioners, we've just, the CFO and myself, what we do, and I have chosen, each year I choose 2 different commissioners from the board to come in and sit in on budget hearings. And that they are open to the public, but that does not justify a quorum in my county. And so, that way it's open to everybody, but it's not me and the CFO presenting a budget to the commission. You got 2 other commissioners that's heard the pleas from the constitutional officers, pleas from the department heads on what they need there. So we've and that's worked really, really well, is because you got a committee then, and it does not look like that the chairman or CFO is doing any kind of everybody. And so when you got 3 commissioners coming back agreeing on a budget or agreeing on what's there, you have that. But it's a complicated situation with the it's a kind of a question. You could ask exactly define day-to-day operations, because it's not really clarified. You know, it just says Board of Commissioners are vested with their day-to-day operations. They had that changed at the local legislation back in the early. The board is vested with complete authority over persons of matter for all employees within the direct jurisdiction of the board. So they have that full authority to do what they want to, but the chairman isn't elected, and it would take an act of legislation to change where the chairman's not a full person, and then if they hired a committee to come in. And so I think that kind of gives you a little bit of an overview. It's a unique situation, but Chairman Turner, when they want to see Kevin Little. When a citizen's upset, you know, they know there. By the way, I will touch on this. My college degree was in public administration and political science, so I knew I wanted to get into politics, and it was perfect time way back then. But I've had 2 people run against me trying to bring the county manager form of government in, and I would say, you know, I told them in that, you know, I don't have the master's, but I said I've got the college degree that the county manager will have, and I've been successful both times and fought those off. So, but it's a unique situation, and it's at times it's difficult because my department heads, they actually, I have a department head meeting once a month, and then I have a cabinet meeting every other week with my 7. I have 13 department heads, so I have 7. That's finance, HR, public works, crucial ones, IT, that are very crucial in the county. And so, although I can't hire or fire them, I can discipline them and such as that. But I just, you know, it would be hard if one of the commissioners or 2 of the commissioners said, we want you to do this or we want you to do that. It just makes it very hard for them to answer to more than one chief. And I think we've worked really well in our time there, but I could see a problem as it goes forward. I'll ask you any questions.
It does not appear you have any questions. Thank you so much for
All
your
right,
testimony.
good deal. Thank you.
Looks like in the audience we have Commissioner Nancy Jester and Commissioner Jeff Rader. Would either of you like to speak on DeKalb? Just to give us a quick overview of what we've been hearing from the other counties.
Thank you, Chairman Hanson. I'm Jeff Rader. I am the presiding officer of the DeKalb County Commission this year. DeKalb is the only CEO form of government in Georgia, and it is comprised of a countywide chief executive officer that is elected for a 4-year term on a partisan basis. And then there are 7 members of the Board of Commissioners. 5 are single-member district commissioners, and then 2 are super district commissioners, which comprise half of the county. In DeKalb's case, the east side and the west side of the county. So they represent fully 350,000, whereas we commission single district or single member district commissioners represent about 150,000. Our form of government, as I said, is unique for the state of Georgia, but is not uncommon elsewhere within the United States. I would say, though, that there's a lot of variation, as you've heard, both in the commission manager or the commission chairman form of government in Georgia, and likewise in DeKalb, our form of government has its own quirks and peculiarities that often substantially influence the efficacy of the operation of the government. You've heard that, for instance, when it comes to administrators, we do have an office in DeKalb County called the Executive Assistant, which is similar to a county manager. However, the authority of the CEO to hire and fire is pervasive within the county. So the county manager, if they are allowed to, or the executive assistant, if they're allowed the room to do a great deal of administration, they can act more as a manager, but it is the prerogative of the CEO to intercede in almost any area of decision-making for the county government under their authority. The CEO nominates the executive assistant, the HR director, the planning director, and there's one other office. What's that? Finance director, for confirmation by the Board of Commissioners. But the Board of Commissioners can, with a supermajority vote, 5 votes, dismiss the executive assistant, but the others are subject to employment at will under the CEO's direction. There are myriad anomalies within our organizational act. As I mentioned, Mayor Tomlinson talked about you get in with 6 votes and you get out with 6 votes. In DeKalb, the CEO has unilateral authority to dismiss the executive assistant, whereas it would take 5 votes of the commission to accomplish that. DeKalb has an unusual situation with its purchasing powers. Previously, the purchasing process was under the sole authority of the CEO, which had the effect of not allowing the county to adopt any code as it relates to purchasing in the county. We had to rely on state code, which obviously is very general because it has to govern small governments versus the large governments that we are. 2 years ago, or I guess almost 4 years ago now, our org act was changed, but it was changed in an ambiguous way, and we're still struggling to the degree to which the Board of Commissioners can adopt a purchasing code that would be binding and enforceable across the county. Without that type of a code, it really is administrative prerogative that can be changed at any notice by the CEO, or without notice by the CEO. So you can see where those rules are important in the efficient operation of government. We also have the provision where the members of the commission are required to go through the CEO's office to be able to access information from department heads. The executive assistant is considered a direct report to the Board of Commissioners, as is the finance director. But as I had mentioned before, sort of the prerogatives of the CEO often overshadow the commission's expectations on that type of direct appointment. One of the points that I would make, having heard the other members or the other local government leaders talk about this issue of full-time and part-time, in most, if not all, of these organizational acts, that particular matter is differentiated by whether or not the elected official can have outside employment. So if you are not allowed to have outside employment, I think that people consider that to be full-time. If you're allowed to have outside employment, then commissioners can choose to put as much time into that role as they choose to. I would suggest that elected office for all of us sort of conforms to Boyle's law of gas dynamics, which states that a gas will expand to fill whatever container you put it in. And in government sense, that means that you can spend as much time representing and your constituents as you would like to spend. I think that many folks spend a great deal of time, whether or not they are prohibited outside employment or not, within their legislative responsibilities. And certainly, when you have large, complex, full-service local governments, there's a lot of territory to cover in that regard. So that's a brief overview. I would, another of my observations is that each of these are sort of one-off forms in every one of the state's 159 counties, and in all of our municipalities. You can have a charter as approved by through local legislation that has its own unique characteristics. Other states have forms of government that are dictated by the size of their government, or they're allowed to order off of a set menu, so to speak, and the forms are specified by act of the state legislature. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for your committee to be able to look into forms of government, make some strong recommendations, and potentially help us to work to perfect our government locally. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Well, thank you for being here, Mr. Commissioner, as you are my commissioner. I do have a couple of questions. You were talking about the nomination of the executive assistant, HR director, planning director, finance director, et cetera. So the CEO nominates, and then the commissioners confirm?
Would either, that's right, confirm.
Or-
We don't have
yeah.
the authority, and in fact, it's specifically precluded from us to make nominations.
Okay.
So we can only approve the nominations by the CEO.
And once these have been approved, these people no longer answer to you. In fact, you're prohibited from going to them for information. You have to go through the CEO's office.
Except for the executive assistant, where we do have the authority to raise a supermajority. And we are, directed at points in the org act to work through the executive assistant.
Okay. Let's talk about the budget process. Who prepares the budget?
So the CEO and his employees prepare the budget. It is submitted no later than December 15th of the prior year for the upcoming calendar year. And DeKalb County operates under a continuing, authorization through the end of February, when the Board of Commissioners must adopt a budget.
Okay, and so y'all would adopt the budget at that point, right?
Yes, and we can amend that budget.
And does the CEO have the authority to veto your decision when it comes to the budget?
Yes, also both at a general level as well as at a line item level.
Line item. Okay. Who's generally in charge of economic development for DeKalb?
In DeKalb County, right now, under our service delivery strategy, local governments are responsible for economic development within their jurisdictions. DeKalb also has a statutory development authority, and we have a agreement, MOA, or a contract with them to administer approximately $750,000 worth of county funds to support their efforts in economic development.
Okay, and last question. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk that this is not an uncommon form of government other places in the United States. You don't have to tell me now, but can you get me some examples of those offline?
Sure. Michigan, Maryland, places like that, but we can get you other examples of
specific
yeah,
places.
that's right.
All right,
Mhm.
thank you. Chairman Reinders?
Yeah, I apologize, but I'm just simply fascinated. How many other counties have at large, but more than just one at large commissioner?
I can't speak beyond us. We had 2 at-large commissioners, and then it was changed to be super districts, so they would only be representing half of the district. But I don't know for
Right.
sure how many others have multiple at-large.
On one of the handouts that I provided is a spreadsheet, and it tells you which ones
Have super at large.
Yeah.
I need a little leeway here as a member of the redistricting committee, because I remember a lawsuit about multi-member districts not too long ago, and I'm just now. Do y'all draw those through home rule?
Yes, our delegation does it through local legislation.
Can they do that? Do you know, through home rule?
I'm sorry, Mr.
Can they draw their districts through home rule?
Canyon County Commissions
Mm-mm.
draw their, through the reapportionment process, like the General Assembly goes
Right.
through, that will go through the General Assembly for local government.
So they can't do it through home rules. I think cities can.
I don't believe they can.
All right, if you'll get a clarification.
I
And here's the interesting thing to me. The decision was made somehow to run, as you said, the two super large districts, east and west, as opposed to north and south.
That's right.
Do you remember the logic or the thought process behind that?
It was the delegation that made that decision to draw them on those. Both, they were originally at large across the county so that they were elected countywide. Then they became super districts. For a while it was north-south and then east-west. You know, DeKalb is a very diverse county when it comes to both economics, level of development, all of those issues. And I think that the East-West was considered to give those super district commissioners sort of the broadest exposure to, you know, the full county constituency.
Thank you. And I would actually love to see those maps, just for my own intellectual purposes. If I may continue, because there's a part. I'm sorry. Okay. There's a part of me that wonders. No one wants to be. You know, we want to make sure that we're within the guidelines of one person, one vote.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're looking at a setup of 7, and 2 of them would be super, I'm just wondering if there's a way to perhaps have more votes on the southern end of the county, or the northern, or the east, or the west, and how the logic and thought process to make sure that we were within that one person, one man provision was met. I'd love to know how y'all came up with
So the
that.
super districts both have to have the same number, right? As well as the single member districts all have to have the same number. So, you know, there is that level of parity. The lines, again, are drawn by the...
But hypothetically, if there was 3 districts in the southern part of the county
Right.
and a southern vote, that would actually give them 4. And I don't know that. I'm
Yeah.
just...
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think that is, you know, we rely upon our delegation to make good decisions in that regard. One thing that is important to understand is that we have a provision in our Org Act that provides that for zoning, that at least one of the commissioners that is elected at the location where the zoning is proposed has to vote in favor of the zoning for that zoning to take effect. And what that does is it prevents people that are not elected in that particular area where the impact will be felt to be able to unilaterally change the zoning there. And so as a consequence, if you had only single member districts within the county, then that decision would really fall entirely upon a single elected official. With the super district overlay, you're allowed to have, you know, you have 2 people that can consider that particular decision. And, you know, I mean, at one level, these are similar to, you have a bicameral House legislature in Georgia where you have larger Senate districts than you have House districts. And I think that this was trying to get at the same issue.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As Michelle pointed out when she was going through the different forms of government, there was a sentence in there that said, like state governors, elected county executives may be granted extensive or very limited formal authority, and goes on to define a strong county executive versus a weak county executive. And it seems as though, as I've listened, that more than likely yours, DeKalb County must be a strong executive power. Is that correct?
Yes, I would say so. And moreover, by, I guess, local constitutional amendment, the division of powers between the CEO and the Board of Commissioners is fixed and subject to referendum. So those powers are very clearly delineated within our organizational act. If the legislature chooses through the local delegation to change that, then it has to go to a countywide referendum.
Thank you. And one other question, if I may. If the strong form of executive government, can that person, he or she, could they veto? Are they allowed in your?
Yes, they are able to veto any
an
act of the that's right, of the
board.
Board of Commissioners, and that veto may be superseded by a supermajority, 5 votes on the Board of Commissioners.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rader. You don't have any more questions.
Thank you.
Oh, just kidding. Chairman Reiner.
Thank you. And just to follow up, is this the what you were referencing on how many. And I see where it says, district at large, for example, under the DeKalb, and it's got number of boards 7. I guess what I was asking for is I didn't know that we had counties that had 2 or 3 at large. So if you can give me a further breakdown on the districts at large. Because to me, there's a thought process that says if you're going to have 7, I don't have a problem. That's local, you know. Why not just do 6 and 1? Which is what the other models I
Sure.
typically see. And I didn't know if you had a reason for that.
Well, we didn't set, or at least I or none of my current colleagues set that particular dynamic. It has been there, I think, since 1981 when this CEO form of government was adopted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so today we have received a very thorough overview as to the different forms of county government, and I just wanted to let you know of our upcoming meeting dates. We have September the 27th, tentatively October 10th. We have a few members who may not be able to be present, so we're looking into that one, and then November 15th. We anticipate that the locations will most likely be in Atlanta, but we're also in talks about having them outside of Atlanta as well. So that will be on the agenda. Otherwise, if there are no further comment from the group, we are adjourned. Thank you.